There was once a tiny doll who belonged to a girl who did not care for dolls. For a long time she lay forgotten in a mackintosh pocket until one rainy day when the girl was out shopping. The girl was following her mother around a grocer's shop when she put in her hand into her pocket and felt something hard. She took it out and saw it was the doll. "Ugly old thing," she said, and quickly put it back again, as she thought, into her pocket. But in fact, since she didn't want the doll, she dropped it unnoticed into the deep freeze, among the frozen peas. The doll lay quite still for a long time, wondering what was to become of her. She felt so sad because she did not like being called ugly, and partly because she was lost. It was very cold in the deep freeze, and the tiny doll began to feel rather stiff, so she decided to walk about and have a good look at the place. The floor was crisp and white, just like frost on a winter's morning. There were many packets of peas piled one on top of the other. They seemed to her like great big buildings. The cracks between the piles were like narrow streets. She walked one way and then the other, passing not only packets of peas, but packets of sliced beans, spinach, broccoli and mixed vegetables. Then she turned a corner and found herself among beef rissoles and fish fingers. However, she did not stop, but went on exploring until she came to a box of strawberries, and then ice cream. The strawberries reminded her of a time when she was lost once before, among the strawberry plants in a garden. Then she sat all day in the sun, smelling and eating the strawberries. Now she made herself as comfortable as possible among the boxes. The only trouble was that people were continually taking boxes out to buy them, and the shop people were always putting in new ones. At times it was very frightening. Once she was nearly squashed by a box of fish fingers. The tiny doll had no idea how long she spent in the deep freeze. Sometimes it seemed very quiet. This, she supposed, was when the shop was closed for the night. She could not keep count of the days. One day when she was busy eating ice cream out of a packet, she suddenly looked up and saw a tiny girl that she'd never seen before. This little girl was sorry for the tiny doll and wished she could take her home. The doll looked so cold and lonely, but the girl did not dare to pick her up because she had been told not to touch things in the shop. However, she felt she must do something to help the doll. And as soon as she got home, she set to work to make her some warm clothes. First of all, she made her a warm bonnet out of a piece of red flannel. This was a nice and easy thing to start with. After tea that day, she asked her mother to help her cut out a coat from a piece of blue velvet. She stitched away so hard that she just had time to finish it before she went to bed. It was beautiful. The next day, her mother said that they were going shopping, so the little girl put the coat and the bonnet in an empty matchbox and tied it into a neat parcel with brown paper and string. She held the parcel tightly in her hand as she walked along the street. And as soon as she reached the shop, she ran straight to the deep freeze to look for the tiny doll. At first, she could not see her anywhere. Then suddenly, she saw her right at the back of the shop, playing with the peas. The tiny doll was throwing them into the air and hitting them with an ice cream spoon. The little girl threw in the parcel and the doll at once started to untie it. She looked very pleased when she saw what was inside. She tried on the coat and it fitted. She tried on the bonnet and it fitted too. She jumped up and down with excitement and waved to the little girl to say thank you. She felt so much better in warm clothes, and it made her feel happy to think that somebody cared for her. Then she had an idea. She made the matchbox into a bed and pretended that the brown paper was a great big blanket. With a string she wove a mat to go beside the bed. At last she settled down in the matchbox, wrapped herself in the brown paper blanket, and went to sleep. She had a long, long sleep because she was very tired, and when she woke up she found that the little girl had been back again and had left another parcel. This time it contained a yellow scarf. Now the little girl came back to the shop every day, and each time she brought something new for the tiny doll. She made her a sweater and a petticoat, knickers with tiny frills, and gave her a little bit of looking glass to see herself in. She also gave her some red tights which belonged to one of her own dolls to see if they would fit. They fitted perfectly. And at last the tiny doll was beautifully dressed and looked quite cheerful. But still nobody except the little girl ever noticed her. "Couldn't we ask someone about the doll?" the little girl asked her mother. "I would love to take her home to play with." The mother said she would ask the lady at the cash desk when they went to pay for their shopping. "Do you know about the doll in the deep freeze?" "No, indeed," the lady replied. "There are no dolls in this shop." "Oh, yes, there are," said the little girl and her mother, both at once. So the lady from the cash desk, the little girl and her mother all marched off to have a look, and there, sure enough, was the tiny doll among the frozen peas. "It's not much of a life for a doll in there," said the shop lady, picking up the doll and giving it to the little girl. "You had better take her home where she will be out of mischief." And having said this, she marched back to her desk with a rather haughty expression. The little girl took the tiny doll home, where she lived for many happy years in a beautiful doll's house. The little girl played with her a great deal, but best of all, she liked the company of the other dolls. They all loved to listen to her adventures in the deep freeze. And that's the story of the little girl and the tiny doll.